I'm John Heilemann, and this is the Hell and High Water Podcast. My guest this week, rock and roll icon, Stevie Van Zandt.
Hi, I am Stevie Van Zandt, and the state of our union is frustrating, a little depressing, but better than it was.
And we are off to the races here on Hell and High Water Day with Little Steven, Miami Steve, Stevie Van Zandt, author of, look at this, Unrequited Infatuations. Here's the first plug, the first of many plugs today. Steve, thank you for doing the show. Tell me what it was like to write the book. I mean, you've been a writer, you've done stuff for a long time, but you're mostly a musician, right? How hard did you find it? I find it incredibly hard writing books, by the way. So, however hard you found it, it couldn't be harder than I find it.
Well, I tell you, you've done some really great ones. It was difficult for a couple of reasons. I mean, just trying to fit everything in. And I had no idea how complicated my life was. I mean, one of the reasons why I wrote the book was to literally explain my life to me. But, once you start getting into it and you're just kind of going chronologically and you're going back and, it could have been twice as long, believe it or not. And then, I know a little too much, so I got to be careful about what, you don't want to feel like you're ratting out the entire world, So it was a little scary about, making sure that I didn't, you want to tell the truth, but not all of it,
Yeah. And, well, if you're in the rock and roll, if you're in your business, I imagine that there's a fair amount of truth that you might want to just kind of not. You don't want to tell any lies, but you may not want to tell not every truth needs to be in the book.
That's it. You leave a little bit of spice. I had tried it like 10 years earlier, and I just couldn't figure it out. Couldn't find any kind of closure to, even in that chapter of my life. So these last 3 years, 2017, 18, 19, by bizarre circumstance, I got back in the music business, reconnected with my life's work, which, I abandoned for literally 30 years. This is not really a book about a guy making it in the music business. This is a guy searching for identity, searching for purpose, searching for spiritual enlightenment, and the bigger themes that I think are more universal, that I hope will make the book more interesting to people than just music people.
I want to hold your hand on the Ed Sullivan Show. I mean, do you have a very vivid memory of actually the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, sitting there in your living room, came on, and your life changing in that moment?
Yes. Oh, yes. Very vividly. We discovered the Beatles halfway through the career, and they were extremely sophisticated. They were started in like 57 and gone in 69.
Right.
And they were just a little too good to actually, look at it and say, "Oh, I think I can do that." Right. Just amazing harmony and the hair and clothes. Everything about them was different and new and exciting and perfect. Perfect. 4 months later, the Rolling Stones come and they made it look more casual and they didn't have the perfect hair except for Brian Jones, and they didn't have any harmony to speak of, and they were really like the first punk band, and so the way I like to put it is the Beatles revealed this new world to us, and the Rolling Stones invited us in. As
you read the book, it's clear, at least it's clear to me, it feels very clear as you describe this period that, obviously the Ed Sullivan thing we just mentioned a second ago, but as you point out, all of these bands coming in, like a kind of just wave after wave, you're getting hit in the face, hearing these new sounds you've never heard before. And it feels like within a year or two, you're like on a track now, right? It's like this is going to be your life. You are going to be obviously hoping to succeed, but succeed or fail, this was the thing for you. There was no other choice. There was no other path. You were on this track.
Yeah, there was no plan B, really,
Right.
And that's real. I think that's what bonded me and Bruce Springsteen. We were the only other guy that we knew that felt that way, honestly. Everybody else, had more sense. They were more realistic. They were more sensible, and as soon as they had a choice, they took it. We really needed each other to strengthen that sort of, if you're the only freak around, you kind of start to you have to wonder, maybe I got a problem here. But if there's two of you, And you're like, well, okay, maybe there's a shot. Maybe we're onto something.
Yeah.
So it was very important bonding at a very important moment. I think that's why we're still best friends to this day.
You both had a decade of working, of trying to make it work. Various bands, various acts. Doing, humping it really, like trying to make it connect. For the better part of a decade before you actually ended up in the E Street Band, right? It's 10 years effectively before you ended up there. I guess right. I'm curious about, you guys were best friends, you were mutual freaks, you're both strapped to the same track with no other choice, no plan B. Why do you think it took 10 years for you to finally, fully integrate?
No. We were in, I don't know.
Bands together, yeah.
Like 5 or 6 bands together before that.
Yeah, that's right.
We'd have a different band every 3 months. I would join his band on the third album tour.
Right.
At a point where, he was in big trouble and about to be dropped by his record company. His first 2 records hadn't done anything. And it was an education. You're constantly searching for that identity. And that would continue. That would continue even, into the late 70s. You break up in 1982, and it's worth. I have to spend a little bit of fair because we get to the second part of your life. This is a big moment, and you are on the cusp of extraordinary success, and you decided to walk away. So I just give you the floor to tell the story of how you say in the book that you've only had 3 arguments with Bruce in your life, and this was the result of this was the first one, and you leaving the band was the really result of the first big argument you guys ever had. So I give you the floor to tell the story of your decision to quit. Well, it was it was a sort of a perfect storm of a number of elements coming together at that same time. I think there was some element of wanting to be untethered from the past. I felt, that I had been giving really good advice for a long time, and I wanted to be an official part of the management team, Right. And he was just not comfortable with that. And at the same time, I was offered a solo deal and exploring what would that mean artistically for me. We're still best friends to this day. But at the time it was a little awkward and not feeling quite like it used to. And so a combination of my own feelings and his feelings, and they just, it was like I say, a perfect storm of elements at that time,
right?
And so I left. The last thing the world needs is a bunch of love songs from an ex-sideman. So who am I going to be? How am I justifying my existence here? And I said, well, I'll be the political guy.
So here's my first question, Little Steven. Why Little Steven as opposed to, you had been Miami Steve. You were Miami Steve Van Zandt. Next thing you know, you're Little Steven with the Disciples of Soul. Explain that to me.
I felt, I had to change persona to fit the work. We had really been the Rat Pack of rock and roll, and I was really in the Dean Martin role, and Clarence was Sammy on steroids. And I was really, that party guy and the fun guy. And I felt, I had to change the persona to fit the work. And everybody had nicknames in those days. And I felt, I'm going to take the work seriously, but I want people to know I'm not taking myself too seriously. So I'm going to continue to have a nickname, but it's going to be, a different persona.
So one of the things about Little Steven was he's a politics guy, it turns out. And you said before earlier in the show, you said, I was a 60s guy, and a lot of things were true. You got drafted to go to Vietnam, and you somehow managed to avoid the draft, like a lot of people who didn't want to go and fight in an immoral war. And you'd been a little bit interested in politics, but all of a sudden, politics became very central to your persona as an artist when you refashioned yourself. What was the impetus for putting politics front and center for you in your solo career? Because that was obviously a dominant feature of it.
I've told the story a million times. I'm on tour, and a kid came up to me in Germany and asked me why I was putting missiles in his country. And of course, I said, "What are you talking about? You know, I'm here to play rock and roll." And the question stayed with me for a long time until I realized, oh my God, you know, I'm not a guitar player or a taxi driver or a Republican or a Democrat. I'm an American, and you know, assuming that we are a democracy, which of course I discovered we're not, but we have a lot of democracy, and assuming that's true, you're responsible or partially responsible for what your government does. And, you know, so I'm making all these connections, and I'm like, well, if I'm responsible, I wonder what else my government has done in my name, and what else am I responsible for, and what else are my obligations, being this American now that I just discovered at the age of 30, you know. So I started reading about our foreign policy since World War II, you know, and then combined with me suddenly having a solo deal, and, you know, I'm leaving the band. Yeah. Okay, well, the last thing the world needs is a bunch of love songs from an ex-sideman. So who am I going to be? You know, how am I justifying my existence here? And I said, well, I'll be the political guy. You know, right. I mean, nobody's doing it full time. You know, certainly, you know, people who have become my close friends, like Jackson Browne, you know, they're at every protest. You know, they're certainly, you know, made important contributions to consciousness raising. You know, John Hall and Bonnie Raitt and Graham Nash and Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane, you know, they're all,
sure,
you know, they all have moments, but nobody was doing it full time, you know, because they were too intelligent to do it full time, you know. So I said, well, that'll be my identity, you know.
Yeah.
So I jumped in completely. Yeah.
So, and you went down, I remember at the time, again, now we're getting into the place where I was like, you know, I'm in college. I remember reading about you going down to Nicaragua and then making this trip to South Africa in 1984. And for our younger viewers and listeners, it's hard people to remember what what it was like in that period in the mid 1980s when the debate around apartheid started to really boil, not just simmer, but boil over in the United States. And when people started thinking about the notion that a lot of American companies had investments in American universities, crucially, had investments in South Africa, and that this was obviously a clearly immoral, repressive, autocratic regime, and one based on its immorality and its repressiveness based on institutionalized racism of a kind that was just as horrifying as American system of slavery, but in the modern age, still the mid 1980s, and you had Ronald Reagan, who said constructive engagement was the way we were going to fix this problem. So you got on a plane, went down to South Africa in 1984, and had a couple experiences that really opened your eyes even more widely than they were already open. I want you to talk about those as a prelude to getting to Artists United Against Apartheid and Sun City.
I was doing research on, I had written down, I think, 44 conflicts we were involved in. And you know, half of them we were just on the wrong side of, you know, one of which was South Africa. But I couldn't really find out much about it. It was oddly hard to get a grip on what was happening, because the conventional wisdom was that there were reforms going on and things were getting better, and you know. And so I went down there. I went down there twice actually in '84, and discovered that, you know, there were no reforms going on. They had this, you know, incredibly brilliant and evil homeland policy is what the so-called reforms were. So the idea was to get all the black people who were doing all of the labor, of course, in the mines, send them back to their so-called tribal homelands, which didn't really exist. They were not very tribal in South Africa, except for the Zulu. So I'm down there, and I'm just talking to everybody I can talk to. It's obvious to me that this thing's got to go. and that the boycott is a good idea. I'd seen that the sports boycott was extremely effective. They were megalomaniacal, the Afrikaners. I mean, they hated not being in the Olympics. Hated it.
Yes.
They were very, very competitive people, you know. And Arthur Ashe and others had, you know, helped establish that sports boycott. I knew, you know, I figured out that the home run was going to be the economic boycott. You know, which would shut the banks off, and then they'd have to make changes. So, you know, the bridge would be the cultural boycott where we came in, and this would make perfect sense, you know, since we're in the culture, and so we use Sun City as the symbol of apartheid.
It's an incredible list of people who came in and played on our United Against Apartheid. The Sun City songs. Bruce is on the album. Bono's on the song. Pat Benatar's on the song. Dylan's on the song. You assembled an incredible assortment of high-end rock stars to come and play on this thing. How did you pull that shit off?
Myself, Danny Schechter, Arthur Baker, and Hart Perry. And without those three, this thing would not have been a success. I had witnessed the black artists having trouble expressing themselves. Those of us in the white community were expected to express ourselves. That was part of our art form at that point that was really prerequisite to be considered a serious artist. And I just felt very differently about it. I'm like, this is extremely important stuff. Finally, black artists are getting a chance to express themselves, and I got to support this. So, of course, we all agreed, and it was because of Arthur Baker's phone book that we got it done. You know, we knew by pointing to an extreme version of racism, we would also be, hopefully, people would start recognizing our own, you know. Exemplified by the fact that nobody would play it in America because it was too black for white radio and too white for black radio. So there you go. You know, there's our own apartheid, which unfortunately is rearing its ugly head right now again.
Yes, sir.
You know, in an extraordinary way. The video thing never really replaced the live thing for rock, you know. We still are you know, the most meaningful of anybody performing, I think.
Some people may not realize it, but the Rascals were the first rock band in the world. In the 50s, you know, we had vocal groups and solo people, you know. And then in the 60s on the West Coast, we had the Beach Boys, but yeah, they really were a vocal group and they became a band later, you know. We also had the Byrds, but McGuinn really did that first record by himself, and then they became a band later. And okay, over there in England, some guys were making some noise. But in the real world, in the center of the universe, New Jersey, the Rascals were the first band.
So that's the 1997 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. You're inducting the Rascals, and that is a speech that David Chase, who's about to make who's thinking about making a show about a New Jersey mob boss called Tony Soprano, that hearing you, apparently, seeing you deliver that speech, begins the journey that ends up with you on The Sopranos. Tell that story.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, that's how my life happens, you know. I mean, if he had gone one channel further with the remote, you know, no acting career whatsoever. Right. It was that bizarre, and you know, he was ready to move on. He had been in TV his whole life and wanted to make movies, which he's now doing, and you know, was ready to break all the rules and wanted new faces in this final TV show. Anyway, they found me, and he called and said, you know, you want to be in my new TV show? And I was like, wow, what a nice compliment, but no, thanks. I'm not an actor, you know?
Yes.
And he said, yes, you are. Yes, you are. Come on down. So at that point, I kind of was, I was kind of done with the music business and looking for something to do. So
did he tell you what he saw in you? From that,
Yeah,
like, what
yeah.
was it that he saw in you that made him think? Because he didn't just want you to be in the show; he wanted you to be Tony Soprano.
Yeah,
he wanted
I
you to be
know.
the lead in the show.
No, that's why David Chase is a genius. What can I say? And he's David Chase, and we're not.
And I'm not. Yes, that's right. Fair enough. Good point.
Well, it was partly his contrarian, sensibility. I mean, and believe me, he is a contrarian. He likes to do things the hard way and make things difficult for the powers that be. Partially, he had been a big fan. He had my solo records. He saw me acting that role, more or less, in the band. He knew we were not nameless, faceless sidemen. He saw me as that second banana to Bruce or whatever. He kind of put it together in his head, and plus he wanted Jersey credibility.
Yeah.
Everybody had turned down the show because he insisted on filming in Jersey. And people were like, we don't do that in Hollywood,
Yeah, right.
What are you, nuts? So it was a combination of all of these things, I think, that made him, And I went down and I auditioned. I took it seriously because I thought this could be a whole new career, a whole new craft. So I found out where John Gotti got his clothes made, and I wrote a whole biography about the guy and designed his 50s look, because he was a bit of a romantic, thinking, back in the good old days before the mob started ratting each other out, And I got the gig, actually, and he just said, well, we just have a formality with HBO, you have to go audition for them. I never got a chance to write or produce or direct with Sopranos, but I would with Lilyhammer. I took everything I learned with Sopranos and used it on Lilyhammer. That's why I'm particularly proud of those 24 shows.
One of the last two questions I have for you. There are a lot of people who think basically rock's dead now. I mean, as a business thing, rock and roll, kind of doesn't, in the music business, it's not really a functional category anymore. So I ask you, does rock still matter in 2021? And if it matters, how does it matter? Why does it matter? What do you think? Why do you think it's important still? Rock and roll itself.
It's the umbrella of rock that hangs over everything to this day, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and everybody in it. It's remarkable that it has lasted this long. You're talking about 70 years now, 70 years of this umbrella of rock. Yes, the industry, the rock era, was specifically, I clock it from 65 to, Like a Rolling Stone to Kurt Cobain's death, exactly 30 years. And then we returned to a pop era, and rock has now returned to being a cult. But it will always be significant. It is somehow unique in its ability to contain and sustain and communicate substance. There's something odd about it, the way it evolved, and I talk about how it evolved in the book, very very specifically, thanks to the Bob Dylan mostly, but there's something there that we're still the industry has no use for us anymore, but live we're still the biggest thing. We're still the biggest thing live because that's a big part of rock. The video thing never really replaced the live thing for rock. We still are the most meaningful of anybody performing, I think.
I am with you 1,000% about the enduring power of rock and roll. I'm so grateful to you, Stevie. I want to do whatever I can to try to get people to read this book and love this life, because it's a great life that you've lived, and thank you for living it, and thank you for writing it all down.
Great talking to you, John. Really, really great. I'm a big fan of yours and your work. So keep it up, and it's a good conversation.
We'll see you down the line. We'll make some trouble together at some point.
All right,
Peace
man.
out.